30. Januar sind in Deutschland die Würfel gefallen. Und ich glaube nicht, dass die Gegner, die damals noch gelacht haben, heute auch noch lachen.
Series, as I promised, it's not a really exciting series, but I do think that it's vital in preparing us for what's coming down the line, to be honest. These might be some of the most important messages I'll ever preach, but looking backwards. But we're going to be faced, and we are facing some of the stuff that's already going on there. I said it's all, the last one was all about, it's all about the money. And so we're busy spending our children's futures is what we're doing. I told you the debt that was on our per household was $80,000, if an average household a touch more than $80,000. And so we're busy spending our children's futures. And that's the reality of what we're doing. Our parents hand us on much less debt than what we've got going on now, and we are drowning our children in debt, so they're going to have to climb our way out of that. Collectively, I mean, not individually. Well, probably. Collectively, there's some individuals that have no regard whatsoever in that space, and so as a country, though, that's certainly what we're doing, so we need to drop that. But the next thing we need to recognise, lesson number 3 that we can learn from Nazi Germany is this, that what is legal is not always moral. Okay, so there's a distinction that should be made that what is legal is not always moral. The question we've got to ask ourselves is what made these rational German people become SS troops and shoot innocent people? Do callous acts on them, experiments on people with, you know, human experiments regarding twins and stuff like that was quite famous. What makes people able to treat another person literally like an animal? Literally like an animal. Well, it's easy. It's because Hitler redefines them as being subhuman, as being not human. But a different race, and so you could kill them as you would kill a dog. You know, if you ran a dog over, you might be a little upset, but you're not distraught as if you've hit a child, is that right? And so it all comes down to legal definitions. So if you run over a dog, it's not like you get hauled before a court and have to try and get off, is that right? And so there's different distinctions between killing a child or running over a person with a car and running over a dog. Well, I mean, I've run over hedgehogs, I've hit kangaroos, I've just about cleaned up the whole national emblem, really. You know, the only thing I haven't hit was an emu, but Tiana went pretty close when she hit a peacock. And so we've done pretty close there. But in 1923, so early days for Hitler, this is what he said in a speech in Munich. He said this: "The Jews are undoubtedly a race, but not human. But not human. They cannot be human in the sense of being an image of God, the eternal. The Jews are the image of the devil. Jewry means the racial tuberculosis of the nations." Now understand, he's using language here to inflame the nation. I told you that he said later on that Christianity and the Nazi Party or National Socialism was irreconcilable. He didn't even believe in all this stuff, but he uses language to colour the way the nation thinks about these people. And so he says that they're the image of the devil is what they are. They're definitely a race, but they're not in the image of God. They're somehow a separate, distinct class is what they are. Because they're not human, he made sure they could be killed without legal penalty. Okay, so without reprisals. So he changes the laws to ensure that extinguishing this race is not a crime. Okay, so those, imagine if they took that of a, say for Filipinos, they said, well, Filipinos are not, we know biologically they're not human, and therefore people can flog them. You imagine what certain husbands would do to their wives in that instance. When the restrictions of law are taken off, suddenly when you're disobedient or having a cranky day yourselves, he can just bury you with a shovel in the backyard like you would a dog, no problem. That's what these guys were faced with. So what does he do? He institutes new laws. He removes Jews from personhood. So what is the state doing? The state's erecting a new god, right? Just like Nebuchadnezzar, putting up a new statue, and they say, you will bow down to this, is what they're saying. That's essentially what the state's saying. Saying they're no longer a person. Now, if you've lived next door to Mr. and Mrs. Hammerstein, or whatever it is, you know they're people. These people were like, some of them had been third and fourth generations long-term Germans. They've been your neighbours for hundreds of years, families grown up together. Suddenly there's a law that decrees these people are not human anymore. And so this is where they are. So SS troops were now free to start eliminating Jews without committing murder. You understand, when they shot a Jew in the streets or dragged them out from their bed and shot them in the streets, there was no legal reprisals. They didn't have to answer in a court of law or anything along those lines, because these people were not human. They were subhuman. In fact, Hitler said they were less than the animals. And so it was like crushing a mosquito. You know, it's good to be rid of them. They were vermin. And so we look at, the first thing we want to look at is the power of laws. And very serious, it's probably a drier topic, but this is very, very serious, because we're facing a crisis in our own country in this regard. Remember I said last week that Hitler got that Dutch guy to burn down the Reichstag, and they got all spooked with the terrorist act and handed all the powers over to the cabinet, which then handed them all over to Hitler. Once Hitler got all these powers, he started to make laws, but the laws that he made were arbitrary. He could make any laws that he wanted. Really, what the laws that he made was to fulfill the goals of a totalitarian state, a tyrannical regime. So, as Göring said, who was supposed to be Hitler's successor, he put it this way: the law and the will of the Führer are one. So, very dangerous when the laws become whatever the head of the state thinks they should be. Is that right? That's why we've got Parliament. That's why we've got debate. Yes, it's frustrating that we can't get laws, that the existing government can't get them through the Senate. It's frustrating. But I'd rather have that than have what's going on here, where it gets through quick, but it's just one will. So right and wrong are essentially determined by who? By Hitler. He then determines by law what is right and what's wrong, what is plausible, what's legal and what's illegal. He then defines. In 1935, 15th of September, the Nuremberg laws. Remember I showed you when we were doing the 7 churches where he did the big rallies. He used to do big rallies. We'll address some of that next week with propaganda. But that's where he passed what was called the Nuremberg laws. He strips the Jews of German citizenship and makes them subjects. Not citizens, but subjects. He forbids marriage between Jews and Aryans. Now, Aryans are people that were supposedly of German heritage. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed was the thing, was it? But I mean, Hitler himself was dark-haired and brown-eyed, so I don't know how he got where he got, but eugenics is what was going on. Evolution really was at the heart of this thing. This was the tool that he used. But and on the basis of that, these Nuremberg laws, he got 13 administrative regulations against Jews that would later outlaw them completely. So they were a subclass. Many Jews in many towns were deprived of livelihoods and faced starvation. People who had been, I mean, you're talking about Jews here, keen business people, rich people, suddenly on the brink of starvation because of the class of the laws that had come just overnight. In many towns they were forbidden to purchase food and or to do business. Then we have, very careful we need to be in our day and age, they passed laws. Suddenly we begin to redefine treason. And we've got to watch it here in Australia, because we start talking about what's Australian. And we start defining that, and when we start getting hyper-patriotic, I'm not talking about border protection or being stupid in that regard. I'm talking about we start defining what an Australian is by someone's euphemistic thing of what an Australian is. It's dangerous because Hitler starts talking about what becomes treason. And so he defines anything that was contrary to the will and the purpose of the Reich as being treason. Criticism was treason. Freedom of the press was treason. Failure to further the agenda, not just silence, but failure to further the agenda of the Reich became treason. Remember I told you that the first thing he did, or one of the first things he did, was outlaw every other political party. Well, what if you didn't agree with his economic policy? What if you didn't agree with his foreign policy? What if you didn't believe with the labour restrictions and wage? What if you didn't believe in that? Well, I'll tell you what happened. You got defined as what? Treason under these laws. So we've got to be very careful when they start defining our laws and what becomes treason and what we can be held without charge for as an act of terrorism to the government, and what they define that as, because you get stripped of all your rights. So in 1934, but they don't strip you of your rights just ostensibly. We have what's called, in 1934, he establishes a thing called the People's Court. Good names, isn't it? The People's Court is what he calls it. Of course, it's the People's Court. On that, the People's Court tries acts of treason. But in those acts of treason, there's 5 judges you come and sit before, but 3 of them must be appointed by Hitler himself. So if you're going for a majority judgment, who do you think wins? You know, that's how it's set. So ostensibly from the public, we say, okay, well, these must be genuine trials because it's a People's Court. They're trying serious matters for treason, and there's 5 judges, so it must be clear. But of course, the whole system's rigged, is what's going on. And we've got to wonder with some of the judgments coming out of our courts, what's going on in our legal system. It may be ostensibly looking from the public saying, okay, they're going through the court system, but what's happening when you look at the sentencing, when you look at some of the crimes that are getting let off with easy charges, and some of them that are getting hammered, it's unbelievable. Okay, so these are things you've got to look out for. These proceedings in the court were done in secret, right? Like, say, in our day and age, we've got things like discrimination, okay? Courts where you're hauled not before judges but tribunals. The proceedings that happen in there are secret, okay? They're not recorded by any transcript so they can be reviewed down the line. You're not in front of a jury, but you're in front of judges, just as it was in the People's Court. So you're not sitting in a gallery of your peers that can say, well, we can see where she was coming from when she shot that guy in her house that came in to rape her. Because she shot him with a gun, he only had a knife, she's used excessive force. The judge is telling us we should put her away. We understand where she's coming from, we're going to let her off. No, you're not in front of that, you're in front of a judge and a tribunal, and they get to make whatever the sentence is. No one knows what's going on. And the sentences, because it's a treasonous court, a People's Court that tried for treason, the sentences were severe sentences. And so, but everything was secret, no one knew. And so what was the answer? The answer was this is matters of national security. We can't let the public know what's going on. And so we have closed trials and things along those lines, and that's how they do things. Okay, that's how they did it back then in any case. They had crimson red posters that they would put up with the names of people on there that had been executed by the axe. Okay, so they'd have people like that, so you knew, oh, there's a large amount of Jewish names on that book, isn't there? Oh, that professor in the university who stood up against Hitler, oh, see, he's on that list. You've known these people for years. What is it doing to the populace as you see more and more people that were rational people that you might not have agreed with, but they disagreed with Hitler, suddenly they're tried for treason and they're executed? What does that do? It shuts everybody up. It shuts everyone down. You go into a rabbit hole because you say this, if my neighbour, if that can happen to him, what's stopping it happening to me? And that's what happens. There's fear takes hold. There's a guy called R.J. Rushdoony who I've got a book called The Institutes of Biblical Law. I don't agree with everything in the book, but I do agree with this statement. He says, he says this of every society. He says, show me your laws and I'll show you your God. Whatever your laws are, that's your God. And so you wonder, is Sharia law just a system of laws? No, I'll show me your laws and I'll show you my God. Have you got laws that are promiscuous? Have you got laws that are idolatrous? Have you got laws that are greedy for money? I'll show you your God. That's what Rushdoony says. So without the law in their favour, imagine going into one of these courts. You're trying to defend yourself. On what basis do you defend yourself? Because you've got nothing. They've got charges that are false. You've got evidence that you can't bring, or they won't hear, or they hear it and they disregard it. And they've got an agenda against you and your kind. You're gone. What are you going to do? The law's not in your favour. It's not like you can appeal to a higher court. That is the highest court, and it's a rigged court. So you've got nowhere to go. What about pastors who are tried for hate crimes? I told you about Niemoller getting tried for abuse of pulpit is what they called it. But it's hate crimes, hate speech. And so they've got no recourse, and so there was false evidence brought against these people. And there were many pastors and priests who got prosecuted, accused of sexual malpractice and things like that. I mean, we've spoken about Pell, but who knows? You know, that's why we have a court system, to find out whether there's sufficient evidence to prosecute him. Obviously, the police think there is, otherwise they wouldn't have brought charges. But we don't know. That's why we've got to go through a transparent process. They don't have any of this, so we've got pastors that were getting falsely accused of sexual malpractice, things that they couldn't disprove, and the tribunal would put them away. And so Hitler said this, he could belittle pastors and anyone who was opponents of him because he had the power of the law behind him. He could belittle them in any way. And he said this about the pastors. He said, you can do anything you want with them. They will submit. They are insignificant little people, submissive as dogs, as they sweat with embarrassment when you talk to them. And I say that might be his words at that time. But there's coming a day where he'll be resurrected from the grave and he will stand before those people and their God. And I tell you, they won't be the ones sweating in that day. He will be the one sweating. So that's the power of law. It's a frightening thing, isn't it? The power of law. That at the stroke of a pen, a business, I feel for the cabbies in our thing, at the stroke of a pen with Uber being allowed in, these cabbies have paid 300, 400, 500,000 for their taxi licence. Overnight they allow Uber to come in where Lauren can get in her car, get into Uber, and for a small fee, $300, $400 they've got to pay now. That's supposed to even the playing fields up. She can now do the same thing as a cabbie. A cabbie pays $600 in registration. A cabbie pays $6,000 in registration. A cabbie's got to have all these radios and security things in there and cameras and stuff so that if he does anything wrong, it's recorded at the base. And he's all these safety traps. You've got the Uber guy going through for sexual harassment at the moment for all this stuff. But they can set up an industry, and I've got clients right now who have paid that sort of money, $300,000, $400,000. They've bought a house, ploughed that into that business. They go to the bank to value that. What does the bank value it at now? Zero. Nothing. What did our government give them in compensation? Nothing. What did the Queensland state government give them? $20,000. What a joke. Imagine someone takes your house off you, burns it to the ground, hands over $20,000 and says you should be happy with that. Overnight, the power of a law wiped out. Wipes out. That's the power of law. The basis of law. Let's explore the basis of law. It should be clear by now that the moral landscape of a country is strongly influenced by its laws. So when we look at our laws, we see our God. That's what we're saying. So we look at Australia. In Nuremberg, think of this. How could we prosecute? Does everyone know about the Nuremberg trials? Be honest, no? No. Okay, at the end of the war, what happened is they set up these Nuremberg trials. And they started hunting for war criminals, and they began to prosecute them in Nuremberg. Okay, the very place where Hitler had his rallies, they set up a court in there, and they began to grab SS people and others that had enacted murders or whatever they said based on evidence that had been collated, and they tried them at Nuremberg, the Nuremberg trials. And many of them were executed. Okay, some of them were locked up for long term. Who was the guy in England that died? They had him incarcerated over there. Anyway, but many of them were executed. But on what basis, think of this, on what basis did they administer penalties to these people? Because their defences, one after another, there was like this Adolf Eichmann, who had killed many, protested before his execution saying this. He said, I was simply following the laws of war and my flag. Hermann Göring, who had designed all this stuff and was a reprobate, insisted this court has no jurisdiction over me. I'm a German. And you'd have to be quite right. These people had never broken the laws of their country. The laws had been changed to allow them to do abominable acts. Without legal prosecution, they had never broken a law. It's not like they murdered another German. These people were subhuman and a subclass, not a citizen but a subject, and therefore they had no penalty of law. What law in Germany had they broken? None. So on what basis did they execute these people? That's a good question. Because the world all clapped as these people died. On what basis did they put them to their death? Well, Robert Jackson, who was the Chief Counsel of the United States, he said this. He argued that there was a law about the law that stood in judgment of all men and all countries and societies. This is the next point we get to, the basis of the law. There's a higher law that comes from God. Either your laws come from God or they come from men. There's no middle ground here, and all Western democracies have been established on the fact that there's a higher law. Our precedent in law, our very court system is based on the Old Testament. Benjamin Franklin, the founding fathers of the United States, knew that if we lose God at the head or a higher law above all these laws, the system collapses. And so if God doesn't exist, then there's no transcendent law, and therefore we just prosecuted and eliminated these guys in Germany who had committed no law or broken no law in Germany just for the spite of killing them after the war. Or there was a higher law that was applied and they'd broken that was above all laws, and they'd broken that and deserved the penalty that they got. But if God doesn't exist and there's no these laws, if all laws are relative, then each country has its own idea of what laws they should enact. There's no universal standard by which laws can be judged. How can you judge somebody's law? Someone in Pakistan says it's all right to burn a woman because she's given you a raw, argued with you, or she's given you a meal you don't like. So you throw kerosene on her and you can light her up, and the law says that's fine over there. You don't get prosecuted in the courts, or you get an arbitrary little sentence. How can we say that's wrong? On what basis do you say that wrong if there's not a higher law? Because that's a law of their country. They've made that law. How is it not a good law? How do you make that? You understand what I'm saying? You can't judge that law unless there's a higher law. Unless God's behind that, you can't judge it. That's the law they've put in place. Only an appeal to God and revelation can give us the laws by which individuals and countries can be uniformly judged. Without a belief in God, listen to this, without a belief in God, nothing is unconditionally wrong. What if you had a country that said it's all right to have sexual relations with babies? How can you say that's wrong? It's legal in that country. How do you say? In many countries of Middle Eastern descent and things, they do have pedophilia relationships. They don't classify themselves as homosexual, but you have rich people that buy boys. And that's just part of what they do, you know what I mean? How can we say that's wrong? Unless there's God, how do we know that that's not unconditionally wrong? Nothing can be unconditionally wrong because that's a law they've made. It's legal. When God's separated from government, which we're doing everything in our power in the West to do, we're uncoupling. When God is separated from government, we're forced to accept what? arbitrary laws. The same thing Hitler does is the same thing that comes in. When we uncouple ourselves from a higher law, we then get arbitrary laws. A court can make abortion legal, but it can't make abortion moral. Complete this sentence. It's okay to kill my baby when that's what we answer in this country, isn't it? Several years ago in the US, they had pro-life demonstrators. Everyone know what pro-life is? They're wanting, if you're a pregnant mother, to get it to full term, have the baby delivered. So they're against the abortionists. So what they said is they picketed an abortion clinic, and they're outside of this clinic, and they called the abortionists. They were sued for slander because they called the abortionists murderers. And so the abortionists argued, just as Hitler's emissaries did in Nuremberg. They said this: they can't be murderers. They can't be murderers because they haven't broken any laws. So in effect, we say in this country, it's okay to kill a person who is alive but inside another person whenever you want to, and it varies in different countries, 28 weeks or whatever it is. So the experience of Nuremberg and the silent Holocaust in our abortion clinics bear eloquent witness to the fact that the state is accountable to no one except itself. It simply assumes that whatever is legal is moral. That's what it says. Whatever is legal is moral. The law is simply whatever the courts or a dictator says it is. That's what they say. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the US, said this: "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? Except the Lord build the house, as the sacred..." it says, "we have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labour in vain who build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without this concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel." He recognised this. Unless God's at the centre of our laws and at the centre and the restrictions of our government, then we're going to succeed just like the builders of Babel did. It will be ultimately destroyed, and a system that destroys. Now, with a fading Christian worldview, man is now king. We've ousted God from the throne of our hearts and from the throne of our courts and from the throne of our education system and from every other throne in public sphere that we can find. We throw him off. Man is king. He's crowned himself, and he's able to make whatever laws he wants, is what they think. And so that's what's happening. So this leads to the belief that there's no absolutes, absolutely no absolutes, but rather it's a relative evolutionary basis of laws, of morality. Law is what? What the majority wants, or what the judge says it is. And if you agree with that, then we're back to Pakistan, where I can light Jazz up for overcooking my egg and go to jail for a couple of weeks while she has lifetime of disfigurement, and that's not wrong. Nothing can be unconditionally wrong if that's the case. But that's what our legal system's saying in this country. That's how we're being governed right now. There's not one law they think is off the books. We can euthanize people. We can abort babies. We can promote homosexuality. We can destroy the family. We can do whatever we like. Why? Because either the majority wants it, the mob wants it, or a dictator wants it. And so that's where it is. Listen to this quote, and off the bat we say this. We say, all men are created equal. That's what we say, isn't it? we say, remember the old racism things in the US, civil rights movement? We say all men are created equal, is what we say. We all deserve a fair shake, is that what that's what I reckon. Are the whites the dominant race? The whites think so. Are the blacks the dominant race? The blacks think so. Are the Asians the dominant race? The Asians think so. But what do the Christians say? What does God say? He's no respecter of persons. All men are created equal in his sight. It's natural that we all think we're better or we're whatever, you know, as a race. Because we all love ourselves. That's right. The root of it is selfishness. You know, and we see it even before we even knew there were dark people about. The whites fought amongst themselves. You know, we were better. The Vikings were better because they had blonde hair and whatever, and we were so strong, and you know, whatever, we go and plunder the Celts up there, or have a crack anyway. The Celts would give it to them, you know. And I'm sure in the Philippines, it's a nice little country now, but I'm sure before there were tribes. The Baguio tribe was against this tribe, and they used to kill each other. And in PNG, it was the same until the white man came. They all hate the white man now, but at that time they hated one another. You know what I mean? This tribe was against that tribe. It's the nature of men. Francis Crick, the guy who discovered the wonders of DNA, when he unlocked that, he said this. He won a Nobel Prize for his work, and he says this: you must realise that much of the political thinking in this country, and he was a United States citizen, is very hard to justify biologically. It was valid to say that in the period of the American Revolution, when people were oppressed by priests and kings, that all men were created equal. But it doesn't have any biological validity. It may have some mystic validity in a religious context, but it's not only biologically it's not true, but it's also biologically undesirable. We all know, I think, or are beginning to realise that that the future is in our hands, that we can do, to some extent, do what we want. That's where they're at. We want to make laws. Yes, if someone's not biologically... What's he saying? I'll tell you what he's saying, and they've done it. Baby Doe was a person in the US. That's what they called him. He was handicapped, born handicapped. So what did his parents do? They starved him to kill him. And they were never prosecuted. Now I'm asking you the question. Biologically, he was a little bit short of the mark. But God says all men are created equal. But was he afforded the same rights as every other person? The Lord didn't protect Baby Doe, did he? He was killed by his parents. Now, if I starved Jasmine, or she starved me, we'd be around for a while before we went, I can tell you that. But when we did go, we're storing up. But when we did eventually go, you'd get prosecuted under the law. Why? Because we're equal according to the law. But Baby Doe gets nothing. Now I'm asking you, is there a subclass in this country that is afforded no rights whatsoever? I tell you there is. There's babies in the womb that have no rights in this country. They are not afforded the equal status under law that every other citizen is. Even though they're a valid person, we're allowed to take a vacuum cleaner, inject saline, burn them, and then suck them out in pieces and put them in a wastebasket without ever being called murder, without that being called killing or anything like that. They have no rights. And why are they no rights? Because the law says that it's legal. But I don't care whether they say it's legal, how can it be moral? Because they don't believe in a higher power, because they won't believe in a higher power, they can make whatever arbitrary law they like. The question is, who's next? What about the old, when they're biologically not equal? We'll stuff that, we'll do what Hitler did, and we'll just declare a health system that destroys those that can't work and that are handicapped, and we just burn them to save money. We might even euthanize them in such a way that it's gentle, they'll never know, we'll just kill them. Now they got the same rights. See, when you uncouple from God, when our laws uncouple from God, we end up in places with arbitrary laws that are hugely dangerous. Hugely dangerous. What have we got? We've got, in our country, you know, your daughter, apart from the state of Western Australia, she can go at any stage and go and get an abortion without consent. You don't even know as a parent. You don't know. She's a minor. She can't get on an airplane without your consent. Mate, she can't get a wisdom tooth taken out with your consent, without your consent. She can't get her tonsils taken out without your consent. But mate, if she's 14, 15 or something on those lines, or under 16 in the age in Western Australia, she can go and get this stuff done without you knowing as a parent. There was a court case in CQ here of a 12-year-old girl who obviously had some problems, some mental problems and all that sort of stuff, and in order to get an abortion, she had to go through court processes. And people were up in arms. How ridiculous it is that a 12-year-old has to go to court to get an abortion. Now, she had some drug issues and things along those lines, but the parents said, quote, she's mature enough to make this decision at 12 years of age. Hey? Now, I agree there might be some physical problems with her carrying a child or whatever and all this sort of stuff, and maybe there are some medical issues. But isn't that why you've got to go to court, so they can weigh one life up against another? And people are up in arms about even holding up things like that. Why? Because they don't have any rights, we just kill them, is what we think. And these people that are coming into power, we've got to understand their mindset. I was telling you about the mindset of the guy, the cardinal that's on the inner circle for the Pope, and the things that's come out this week about what they've been up to. What about the people that are in power? Well, let's pick Hillary Clinton, who was this close to becoming president, right? The guy that's in there now is almost in by default because people hated her that much that they voted for the other guy, you know what I mean? Not that they like Trump, I don't think. But in April 2015, what did Hillary say? What's their mindset? Are they just there to facilitate with the masses what you really think you want, and what, you know, 60% of the population want this, therefore we're going to head in this direction, and I'm going to just be a good administrator and facilitator of what you think as a population? Is that what these leaders, is that what our leaders are thinking? I'll tell you what they're thinking. Listen to this. This is Hillary at a speech to the women at the World Conference. She argued this: far too many women are denied access to reproductive health care. What is she saying? Abortion. And safe childbirth. Well, I agree with that. And laws don't count for much if they're not enforced. And so in order to expand the worldwide access to abortion, she suggested that. Listen to this. This is what she suggests as the leader. She says this: deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs and structural biases have to be changed. Now, who is she to talk about what deep-seated religious biases have to be changed? She's there on the votes of people who may have differing views to her, and if 50 or 60% have a different view to her that's religious or whatever, who is she to say your view has to be changed? But that's exactly what she said. You've got a huge Bible Belt. Now, understand that she's from the edges in California, and she deals in New York and all this sort of stuff. But right in the middle of the US is this huge belt of Christianity, of whatever you want to call it. What's she saying to that belt? She's saying, listen, I don't give a rat's what you believe. We're going to change what you believe. And the way we're going to do it is how? Through laws that are going to get enforced. The power of laws is what we're talking about. Listen to the language here. She likens here pro-life Americans, so people that are against the murder of innocent children in the womb. She likens them to terrorists. Is there a comparison? This is what she says. Now, extreme views about women. That means that you want to preserve the life of the child within the woman. We expect that from some of the terrorist groups. Right? These extreme views of women. She won't say Islam, but that's what she means. We expect that from people who don't want to live in the modern world. So if you're a Neanderthal, you want to protect life. But if you're in the modern world, we just kill it. But it's a little hard to take from Republicans who want to be the President of the United States. Well, thank God they're in, and she's out. That's all I can say. They've been bought some time But this is the mindset of people coming into power. They're not there to represent you. They'd be a tyrant and force their agenda on the population. And the way they do that is by laws and prosecution and persecution and secret tribunals and courts, and that's the system that's used to get you there. Now, if God's thrown out of the court, we get arbitrary laws of our own making which don't make sense, such as things like the adoption of children to same-sex couples. Do we honestly believe all the research in the world tells you that the best place for a child is with a mother and a father? We've got people in this country who cannot have children. My heart breaks for them. I have the opposite problem. Mate, I'm William Tell. Anytime you just think about it, mate, we have another child. And so, but these people, they're poor, they can't have children. Well, wouldn't they be better off? And we have to say, with all respect to the homosexual community, they are a minority. That the majority of people are heterosexual. So we can only say by extrapolation that the majority of people that can't have children but want children would be heterosexual. But we won't give them these children. What we want to do is force laws on that allow for these homosexual couples to adopt children. A minority group. When the evidence says that the best health for the child is with a mum and a dad, a male and a female gives you the best outcome for children. But we ignore all that. Why? Because they want to force an agenda on us. Doesn't matter what the populace thinks, and we do it by law. And these laws are already in. So what can we expect? Let's finish off like this. If we were to take a crystal ball as Christians here this morning, what could we expect of the road ahead? Given the road that we're on right now, what is the road ahead looking like for the Australian people? Can I just suggest some things, and they may or may not be right, but this is where I see the road possibly going. It's a given, don't you think? We're going to have same-sex marriage. It's a given. I can't think of a bill that's been introduced into Parliament more times and been knocked back. But we seem to be getting it over and over and over. I don't know how many petitions I've signed. Not that I don't know whether they make any difference or what, but I don't know how many I've signed, because we've got bill after bill. It's a fait accompli. Where at some point, and they're conditioning us, at some point we're going to get same-sex marriage. What about this? Full-term abortion. The day before you give birth, due to give birth, you have a fight with your boyfriend and you break up. You think, I don't want to carry his child anymore, let's kill it. Well, that's a reality in some countries. That's absolutely what can happen. What's the difference in a day? What makes it a person when it comes out of the womb? Suddenly you've got the UN rights of the Charter of Rights for the Child, but the day before it has nothing. Can just be killed arbitrarily. Well, that's what we're looking at. What about the criminalisation of any public Christianity? Remember I saw how they define Christianity. You can be a Christian as long as it's within here, it doesn't affect your life or the way you live your life. So you can be a Christian, no problem with that. You can be a Satanist, you can be whatever you like, as long as it does no harm to anybody and you're in it within here. But public Christianity has got to go. So what about praying at a public event? People have been prosecuted for this in the United States, Canada. So you pray, you're having a local basketball game or something along those lines, you have a majority of Christians that are in your team, and so as a coach maybe you facilitate prayer for that team beforehand. And I'm not talking about wacky doodle prayer, I'm talking about just, something that's low-key but respectful, you know what I mean? So we're not trying to condemn anybody out there. We're not saying, God, these sinners that we're going to play before. We're talking about respectful, you know what I mean? We're just having a moment. But it's a big criminal event. It's criminalised in some instances already. So, absolutely. What a beautiful testimony that was, the Fijians winning the rugby sevens at their thing. So good on them for doing that. But that's going. What about crosses on display are going to be taken down? Do you know there's some Lutherans, some Catholic hospitals that are taking crosses down from their hospitals so they don't offend the Muslim community? I mean, Muslims come in, and of course they lodge complaints. That's how they get it. That's how they do it. And so they come in to get helped by that hospital, and in the middle they're wandering down the ward having a heart attack, and they say, that needs to come off the wall. When they get better and they get the heart transplant, then they lodge a formal complaint against the hospital. It's offensive. When I came in here, I had to stand beneath their cross. Well, you don't like it, get out. Go at the base and line up. You know what I mean? But this is what's happening. The criminalisation, it's little by little they're removing the public aspect of, but it'll become criminal. So you'll have no Bibles on your desk, or no Christian screensavers or promise for the day things. That'll be offensive to your fellow workers and criminal to try and do that in the workplace. What else are we going to have? We're going to have unfettered biological manipulation of the human genome. You know, what if you could be much stronger and faster by splicing a gorilla gene with you? You got enough brain that you can be, you know, human, but you're going to have the strength qualities of a gorilla. So what's stopping that? When you uncouple from God and you have no other laws, we can make whatever laws we like. What if it would be handy to have a third arm? You're going to be a scaffolder. You want to get there quick? I don't know. I mean, what is stopping it? What's stopping it? You know? There's nothing stopping it. So we're going to see whatever. I'm using extreme examples. But, you know, what is stopping them splicing around with our human genes and then creating people that truly are subhuman? That are no longer human, but a sort of part human, or modified with a fish, or, you know, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about it. Maybe you're happy to eat an organic tomato, or a tomato that's been spliced with a salmon gene so that it lasts longer on the shelf, or something like that, or a strawberry gene. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't want them mucking around with the human genome, because once you do that and they start breeding, you don't know what you end up with at the other end of things. You can't quarantine a human being. Well, these guys will do that at the start because they'll be subhuman. Okay, let's keep moving on. So we're going to have that. What about hate crime legislation? This is already here in some format. But it's going to be punishable even if comments are made in regards to homosexuality. So my website will incriminate me. Or Muslims, not saying them out there, but when I speak about it in here, or when you speak about it in here, it will be deemed hate speech and will be taken away as a criminal act, just as Niemoller was. Schools will be legally able to punish any child who doesn't participate in the celebration of the homosexual lobby or its agenda. Now, that's already happened down the Safe Schools agenda in Victoria, where people who opted out, or children that didn't want to participate in a wall that was celebrating this stuff, they opted out. They were actually bullied by the other children with no recompense by the administration of that school. And so it's already there as an undercurrent, but this thing will be enforceable. Remember what Hitler did? Hitler outlawed homeschooling. He made all of them go through the state system. Why? Because they get uniform indoctrination is what happens. And so that's what's going to happen. Churches, lucky us, are going to be unable to discriminate against homosexuals or people of other faith, I would think for that reason, for workers in the church. So your pastor, your main pastor will obviously be a Christian, but when it comes to youth workers, administrators, people who work in the schools, co-pastors or associate pastors, when you have your job criteria and a guy who's got far better qualifications, but he happens to be a homosexual, but he's been to every theological college known to man, and he comes and he applies for your job as an associate pastor, you don't give him the job, you give it to John, who's been in your church for 20 years, has very little credentials, but you know the character of the man. Then they will challenge that under unfair discriminatory employment practices, and you'll be prosecuted with the full extent of the law, because there'll be no basis on which to defend yourself. These things will be happening. Of course, as I said, homeschooling will be found unconstitutional. So if you think that with all this stuff coming through that you're just going to opt out and that we're going to have Christian schools that are going to do this, no, they're going to toe the line, or it's going to be, if it's not approved by the state, you don't get any funding. It'll be the first step, and then there'll be prosecution. Also, we're going to have this that's going to come in, and it's already in stages, it'll be a fairness doctrine. Okay, a fairness policy that's going to come in. And what do we mean by a fairness policy? Okay, let's say I'm running a radio station, and I decide that we're going to do a thing on abortion. Right? So we do an hour's program on abortion. Well, it's only fair, isn't it? And it then will become law that we then must do an hour that's devoted to the other side of the argument. And so not only, even though all my listeners are Christian, and so I'm taking a pro-life approach, I then need to give a pro-choice, or should I say murder of children, an hour on my program as well, in the interest of fairness. What about I do an hour or 2 hours program on Islam and its religion of peace and how we go through it, and we present our Christian arguments against Islam. But in the interest of fairness then, we must spend 2 hours getting a mufti in or an imam in to explain the benefits of Islam. That's only fair. It sounds good at the start, doesn't it? Fairness. If we're going to talk about one thing, we need equal time for the other. But is it really fair? Or is it just a mechanism by which we can then destroy and dilute that which is truly Christian? Or because you can bet your boots that Islam will not abide by this. They're not going to give equal time to Christians. I mean, we've got laws to give them every right that we can in this country, but we can't even build a church in Saudi Arabia without the death penalty. Okay. Last one I'll say this. Bible studies, because this is already in many other countries around the world, but because of the terrorist threat and because we will be marginalised and a declassed person, just the same as Hitler declassed the Jews, dehumanised the Jews, by law, you can apply that to any class then. Whoever is not fitting in with your agenda, you can subhumanise them, you can marginalise them, and then the masses will move and leave you behind. You're just left out of society. Bible studies with more than 10 people will not be permitted to be held in homes or any other public place without a religious permit. So you have the state then having records of every religious group, and that's where I'm saying we need to develop a mindset, or at least think about the thoughts of civil disobedience, whether you will comply with some of these laws or opt to do something different because of your faith. And maybe at some stage we'll explore what Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, what they did in their regards, what they complied with and what they did not comply with. Okay, so the pressure to bow to Caesar is escalating. Do you feel it? At the moment we're just sort of trying to get by, is that right? They leave us alone, we leave them alone. But I do feel that the pressure to bow to Caesar is escalating. And so listen to this, laws will be deliberately enacted to bring us into conflict. Deliberately enacted to bring us into conflict with the state. That will be the whole agenda. That's what Hitler did. That's what every regime around the world, whether you're talking about Mao or you're talking about communist Russia, they deliberately passed laws to bring you into conflict with the state. For those that believe in freedom, true freedom of religion, laws are passed to bring us into that. Let's turn in our Bibles. I know there's not a lot of scripture in here, but I do feel it's important to address basic arguments. Can we turn to Daniel 7, and I think it's verse 35. I could be wrong there, but I'll tell you when I get to Daniel. If I can find Daniel 7. Daniel 7 and verse 35. We're going to finish, there's 2 scriptures and then we're finishing. How have we gone? Wow, okay. Oh, not too bad. Anyway, I need a timer, Dale. 7, there is no 35, so I know there's 25, that's why. Okay, talking about the Antichrist here. Talking about the Antichrist. How is the Antichrist going to come about and do what he did? Remember last week we talked about the 4 horsemen?
Okay, Revelation 6, and it talks about the 4 horsemen, how he's first going to come. How is he going to come? Daniel 7:25 tells us, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High. Remember what Francis Crick said, we want to loose ourselves biologically, we want to do what we want to do. This man is simply going to facilitate what is already in their head. He's going to speak pompous words against the Most High. Shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and the law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. Now, I don't know how that fits into, if the rapture happens at the start of the 7 years, how do we get times, and half a times where the saints are given into his hands? Okay? Where another one says the shattering of the power of the... What we're saying here is, what is he going to do? How is he going to enact? I'm not saying that this is happening tomorrow or whatever, but when this man comes on the scenes, what mechanism is he going to use? He's going to use times and laws. What do we mean by times? It's conjecture, times, we don't know. Is he going to rejig the calendar so it no longer is central to the cross? Don't know. Is he going to make us, because Asia is going to be the powerhouse in the next 100 years, are we going to uncouple and go to a Chinese calendar? I don't know what's going to happen. Is it just going to be changing of times? Is it going to be the outlawing of Christian holidays, similar to what Hitler did? And so we lose Easter, we lose Christmas, but they become winter solstice, and they become, a spring holiday. I mean, I don't know. Is that what's going to happen? A total wiping of it. But it's not just the times, it's the laws that are going to change. He's going to use these mechanisms to do it. Hitler lies. Listen to the pattern that comes from Hitler's Germany. Hitler lies at the start. Then he makes laws once he gets in. And then eventually he's worshipped as a lord. There's no other authority greater than him. That's who he is. And so we can expect that. When we turn to Daniel 3, so just a few chapters over, Daniel chapter 3, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego answered and said to the king, when they're challenged on this issue, this is what they say. They said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. Listen to this. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. And I want to tell you, I'm not a prophet, but I'm telling you this right now. There's a time coming where you will need to say these words, where you will stand before kings, they will drag you before tribunals and magistrates, is what the New Testament says, for simply what? Believing that Jesus Christ is Lord. We're no threat to anyone, and yet we're the most persecuted people on the planet. People say, and I hear it everywhere, things are so bad. Things are so bad, Jesus must be coming quickly. I want to tell you this. Things have never been so good. Historically, all Christians have lived under the threat of their lives since Christ. You know what I mean? For at least hundreds of years. We've had this short period where we've had a freedom of religion, where we're able to freely speak. And I don't think it's any coincidence that in that little period where there's freedom to do that, that we've had huge advances in technology. With the freedom that comes with expressing ideas, and the freedom that comes with having the linking of our laws to a higher power and limiting the powers of government thereby. That from that framework, huge advances have come. But we're turning our back on all of that. And we're heading back simply where all our brothers and sisters of Christ have been for hundreds and hundreds of years, living under the terror of this sort of regime where the state hates who you are, hates Jesus Christ, and will not permit you to be a public Christian. But what Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego says, listen, you do what you will, but our God will deliver us. Hallelujah.
Our God will deliver us. I tell you what, when they shut the doors and say, you can no longer buy at a store unless you've got that chip in your hand, I'll be looking for the raven to feed me. I'm looking for divine intervention. Just as Elijah sat at the brook and got fed by the raven, I'll be looking for the hand of my God. It says this, David says this, I've been young and I've been old, but I've never seen the righteous forsaken, or his seed begging for bread. When the world shuts its back on me, listen, I might be eating witchetty grubs, I don't know what he brings. He doesn't always bring filet mignon, you know what I mean? But you will survive. You might be eating manna, you might be eating flour out of a bowl that never finishes. You might have a cookie jar that just every time you lift it up, well, there's another Tim Tam. That'd be lovely. Hey. But I tell you what, God will deliver us. But listen what they said, if he doesn't. What are we singing about? If my flesh be destroyed, I will stand with him on that day. And listen to what they say. I will not bow. I will be your best citizen in every other respect. You know, I will not abuse, I won't assault the police. I pray for the government. I'm praying for the righteous government. I'm praying for the politicians that are in government. I pray for their safety. I'm going to be your best citizen. I'm going to go to rallies, and if I protest against you, I'm not with a ticking clock in there attached to some gelignite or anything on those lines. I'm going to have words to you. Oh, you're not going to have to worry about me coming at you with a sword to cut your head off. I'll be not there to steal from my neighbour. I'm not going to be using foul language in the public or anything on those lines. I'll be your best citizens. But when you divide a law that divides me and my God, I will not bow. And that's the sort of mindset we need. Yes. I'm praying God give us that in our hearts going forward, because we're going to need it. As this thing heats up, as the cauldron heats up, we're going to need to have something on the inside, a bit more than just the hoo-ha and the excitement of a good meeting, or you're going to need something of concrete that sits in there. I tell you what, all of those that could be shaken were shaken. When Nebuchadnezzar stuck up the statue, I'm sure there were Jews there that said, listen, we'll just bow down. We're not bowing down in our heart. We'll just bow down. And I'm sure when the time comes, there'll be Christians that say, listen, I love the Lord. He knows I love him. Just put the chip in so we can buy some food for the family. There'll be Christians that do that because they'll be pragmatists. They want life. They want happiness. They want just to be left alone to get about and just breathe the air. That's what they want. But that will be not permitted at some point in the future. God, I just pray, Father, that your Spirit will mantle us and prepare us for the hours and the days that are coming. God, we thank you that you will not leave us nor forsake us. That's your promise. You will never, never, no, not ever leave us or forsake us. Death, life, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Torment, nothing. Nothing in this life can separate us from you, Lord. And so our hope is built on you, not on our houses, not on our cars, not on our swimming pools, not on our high-rises, not on our apartments, not on anything, not on the clothes or the label on our clothes, not on our shoes, not on our phones. Nothing. Our hope is built on Jesus Christ. God, help it in this hour, Lord, those that can be shaken, Lord, help them to seek your face. Lord, help us to spend this hour and be sober and prepare ourselves and our hearts and our families for the hours that are coming. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name.